Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
It's always a privilege to have you join me, Randall, on this edition, or any edition, of Around with Randall. We hop into an area of growth, of investigation, of inquiry, of uncertainty. And that's the idea of screening. I've got a number of clients that are going through a process and trying to figure out, where does the future of screening work? Now, most of us probably immediately put a word in front of screening, and that's the word wealth screening. I want to pull it back a little bit, because really what we need to be thinking about isn't so much wealth, but about connection. But the history of utilizing data that we can get from various places is strewn with the idea of wealth. So today I want to talk a little bit about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And of course, the tactical. What can you do and be thinking about when it comes to figuring out how to use data more effectively? If we look back, we've always tried to figure out who are the best people for us to talk with. So let's go back to the pre-internet days. And maybe some of you listening are young enough, you're not even aware there was a pre-internet days, or you read about it in a book or heard your moms and dads talk about it. But some of us who are a little bit on the older side, a little more gray hair on the top of the head, know that this existed because we lived in it. It was the starting part of my career. Data gathering for the idea of figuring out who is our best pipeline, our best campaign donors, our best opportunities, however you want to look at it, was a manual screening process. And frankly, I still advise that we utilize this when we need to, because it can be effective at a more detailed level. But it initiated with kind of a manual method of a group of volunteers, normally a board, could be a campaign cabinet or committee or something of that nature, reviewing a prospect list. Who is it that they know? What do they know about them? Do they have money, or would they be interested? And then you might try to match that manually with a kind of a printout or a report of donors to the organization. And it was all done manually. And it was always a review of lists. I think about my earliest days in in philanthropy, which wasn't actually in healthcare, it was in education. And we were printing out alumni lists, and we would have class captains. And the class captains would review these lists and give us information about them. And then we put that information into basically a little bit more advanced Excel spreadsheet, because that's the CRMs we were using. And then we would try to figure out who to go talk to and who could we get an introduction from. There's some basic things that come from that are incredibly valuable. But we were required to accept that the people we had put into this group knew what they were talking about, that their information was accurate, or that they had any information at all. We also might have used public record, which was by paper, so it wasn't very efficient. But I do know of stories from when I began my career, people who would go down and grab publicly known pieces of information from wills and estates that publicly had to be filed in courts, or they were manually looking at different business transactions. This was highly ineffective, highly inefficient at some levels, but if we had accurate information, it could open up the golden chalice, but it was more of a one-off. The late 1990s and then really into the first part of the first decade of this century was not an evolutionary change, but a revolutionary change as we entered the internet age, where all of a sudden we began to, today's vernacular, Google online searches. We're going to start gathering what data we can. It was still individualized much of the time, but it was much faster. And frankly, there might be an argument in the early days, it was more accurate, because normally it would be something from a government database, or it would be something from some type of information gathering from the newspaper. There would be information out there. We're just trying to grab it. And this was the rise of prospect research. We began to realize that profiles, particularly when we're getting close to solicitation, were effective in helping us see a bigger picture of what the prospect or donor might be able to do or want to do. It began also the evolution of wealth registries. Certain public information, and I think about like SEC required reporting, who has certain stocks in certain places depending on their place in a particular company. We began to know that people own jets because that's public information. Large boats, that became public information. Multiple homes, depending on the state, that became public information. These became informational in terms of data. And then you added to that the ability to search financial news, whether it was the sources that the government, when somebody sells stock because they have say maybe they're a board member or something of that nature, or public disclosures, to the financial news. Again, this was important because it was hugely improved, but it was still cumbersome. The early days, the manual method, the invention or the evolution of research into the internet were all based most of the time on a central theme, which is why we use the vernacular, the term today, wealth screening. If you've spent any time with me, if you've done any of the trainings that I do, if you're one of my clients, if you come to any of the educational sessions I produce at different national, international conferences, when I talk about qualification, I always am harping on the fact that 80% of what we want when we think about a prospect in terms of pipeline development, in terms of engaging people at higher levels, whatever that is not about wealth, but about inclination, connection. I've always believed this. But where we are today is this growth into concentrating more on that. Coming out of the kind of the internet era, or the beginning of the internet era, was the process where we began to see companies who actually would aggregate all this data. Wealth Engine, Donor Search come to mind, ironically developed by the same gentleman, but that's probably doesn't get the credit he deserves in Bill Tedesco, but that's okay. I don't think he's interested in it. This aggregation began to pull data together instead of one-offs into what I think of an Excel spreadsheet, one line with the person's name, address, phone number they're giving to you, and then all of this data that comes from it, that about where they made political donations, where they had public disclosure for SEC. As I mentioned, all of a sudden we began to aggregate this data, and we could then run lots of names through a process and come out with some actual analytics that could be used, particularly when we compared it to who was giving to us. How much were they giving to us? These companies began to figure out that if they ran the data in the right way, what we really got was a prediction of how much they could give. And then you could compare it to maybe how much they're giving to you. What's the differential? This aggregation of real estate, of public holdings, of stock, of whatever was public, began the process, if used correctly, of beginning to think about who are the most likely people. But what's coming next, and what we're just beginning, the dawn of artificial intelligence, is going to shift this even further towards what I believe is more important: inclination, connection. We're on the first stages of an equivalency of changing from the manual to the internet. We're going from data aggregation, internet grabbing of data, companies that provide it all, to actually artificially driven, artificial intelligence driven predictive modeling that leads us to inclination. The limitation on wealth screening, air quotes, is it talked about what people have. Where artificial intelligence is going to change is what their behaviors are. And like anything else, change is hard. You can go back and listen to a couple of my podcasts on change. Nobody wants this. The two people I know the most that do not want change in the world are myself and my son. If you read my blogs, I wrote about that it took my wife and I 60 days to get him to change over his room, to move to a little bit more of a room that's not a little kid. Because he's not a little kid, he's 11. Amazing 11-year-old. But it was a plan because one picture moved. It was, we don't like change. Gift officers are no different. Prospect researchers are no different. I was recently with a client, hopefully a to-be client, talking with, and this is a larger place. So they've got prospect management, data integrity. They have their own HR individual that they use to maximize gift officer turnover. So this is a high sophisticated place. We were into the weeds of artificial intelligence, and they've got talented, smart people. Impressive. Man, they are hesitant. We're going to be giving up our data to somebody else, to somebody else's opinions. And they're actually interested in the conversation. Gift officers are recalcitrant. I know best. I know my portfolio. I know my people. What we know is that artificial intelligence can take thousands of pieces of data about one person and begin a process of figuring out who you should be talking to. Think about this, that we, in a aggregation of whether Wealth Engine, iWave, My Choice Donor Search, of just pure data, what's publicly available. Adding to that, anything you can figure out about the person and what they do with your organization, from the basics of giving. In healthcare, we are using HIPAA compliant data for the number of visits they're seeing, the number of doctors are seeing, that these individual doctors are seeing. Then on top of that, it's coming down the road, and we'll talk about this here in a moment, about what's next. He's going to to speak about behavioral information in education, about the clubs they were involved, how long they were at the school, what fraternity or sorority, what groups they did, what they participate in, social services, do they volunteer in other places, all of these pieces of data. But here's the crazy thing. Artificial intelligence isn't a stagnant thing when done correctly. True artificial intelligence. Machine learning is about reapplying a mathematical equation, changing the equation to make it better. So every time you put more data in that people do things, the better the data analysis gets, the mathematics. It has the ability to look at millions of records in moments and give you 200 names, 400 names that are your best prospects. And what I find more often than not is when we do this, two things are true. That they can produce artificial intelligence doesn't mean we're getting rid of the database team or research team. Actually, I would advocate we need more people, but doing different things, which I'll talk about here in a moment. The key here is that it's producing better options, but there's a recalcitrance to accept them. Well, that they haven't given enough money. I'm a major gift officer. I only deal at $25,000 and above. This person's only give $5,000. Why would I be involved with them? Why would I call them? I only want to deal with the rich people. You're like, but the option, if we built a better relationship, could be much greater with these people who may not be giving us $1 million because they could be our $1 million donor in 2 or 3 years if we built a stronger connection. Remember, wealth screening is about how much they might be able to give. Predictive AI, predicting connection, is how likely they are to give. And this then gets us into conversations of estate giving, where all the assets are. Merrill Lynch is telling us $85 to $86 trillion, depending on the market, going to transfer in the next 20, 25 years. And most of it, 85+%, isn't tagged to charities, but we know people are thinking about that. All this is to say is that there's all these pushes and pulls. I think the other thing, just for a moment before I get into the tactical, is to talk about what's coming next, or what I think might be coming next, and this screening identification process. Is that the modeling will get better in overlaying wealth with the connections. So I do this when I kind of have a presentation that I work with, where I literally say we're getting to the point where if we have 10 donors, we'll be able to overlay connection, number one, and then resort it by wealth. So we're not only replacing the highest options of connection, but we're also then stratifying it by wealth. So one of which is this strong integration. The second thing is a personalization at scale. There are experts. I think about my friend Nathan Chappell, my friend Scott Rosencrans, who kind of lead these conversations in the nonprofit industry. If you're not following them, you should. Two dear friends that I trust, not only professionally, but personally. They're going to start predicting what are the next steps for gift officers to do with the individual donors. What's the donor journey? How do you tailor individual messaging to individual donors? How do you take strategy and make it dynamic that might change depending on the time of the year, when their last gift was? We're going to get to the point where artificial intelligence is going to start driving conversations about gift officer choices and activity. And what I anticipate is that will not go over well for many. Well, I know best. We're going to talk here at the very end about not being a replacement. So hang on if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't like Randall. He's telling me I'm going to be out of a job. Actually, no, I think you're going to be better at it. I think the other thing is that we need to consider ethical considerations. Again, Nathan Chappell, Scott Rosencrans have led the conversation about ethics in AI, and particularly in the nonprofit space, lecturing and teaching and talking about it all over the world. This is going to get into things like, can we grab social media posts so we hear and know in real time what people are saying on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, Instagram, whatever, and tie that into behavioral modeling of exactly what somebody's thinking and doing. Now, there's an argument to say it's all public information. They put it out there. But there's ethical concerns here. Is it being used for the good? There could be negative ways to use this information. All this is to say is that this is the starting point of AI, of the modeling towards inclination with an overlay of wealth. What we know is that we're going to run into things we haven't even thought about yet. So what's the tactical in my last 3 or 4 minutes? What are you supposed to do with all of this? This isn't just a history lesson, although I appreciate you listening and letting me teach a little bit. There's 5 things that I think are really important. And I don't have all the answers on this one, but I know what I should be doing. That's what I want to share with you now. Number 1 is you need to engage in the conversation. If you're burying your head in the sand and you're not willing to think about this, read about it, follow it. Now I know the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy is going to have a conference in the summer of 2025 just on AI, because healthcare probably has more data that's real time than any other sector of the nonprofit world. How are we using it? What's appropriate? How do we manufacture? There's huge conversations. Healthcare is probably leading that discussion or direction because of the amount of HIPAA-compliant health data that we're allowed to have. You have to be willing to learn, to accept that it may look different. And you can follow Nathan. You can do lots of different things to make sure that that's possible. Read about it. Go to conferences. Take a webinar. I'm not asking you to become an expert, but what I am saying is if you don't adjust, it will run you over or run by you. Number 2 is you're going to have to fight for investment. Invest in your database, in your data, in your analysis, in your modeling. I have a friend who I advise because she's someone I've known for a long time, and I appreciate the work she does, and I like the organization she's working with. And it's not formal, but one of the issues they're having is the organization's like, well, we just don't have any money. And I keep saying to leaders in that organization, every day you don't invest in this, you're just leaving money on the table. You are making your philanthropy operation, the fundraising abilities, diminished. You can yell about the costs. You can yell about, well, it's not a direct ROI per se. There's some argument one way or another. But at the end of the day, if you don't invest in this, you're going to lose, because the places that are making money, driving revenue philanthropically, are investing in this. There has to be a long, hard conversation about these costs. Now, here's the good thing, because I have a little bit of insight in particular because of my friendship with Nathan Chappell, is this is not a $1 million investment. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars a year. But if you can spend, I'm picking a random figure, $35,000 to invest in kind of a predictive modeling process, AI, but it produces $250,000 in new gifts, who is yelling about that kind of 6 or 7 to 1 ROI? But man, it's hard to get those budgets. You got to fight. You got to show results. You got to listen to, bring in the experts, work with your CFO, work with your board, indicate and advocate for this investment because it will pay off. Expense can't be an excuse. It's got to be, hey, this is what we need to be more successful. 3 is then very simply, just don't let it sit off to the side. It's got to be integrated in your CRM. Most of the work being done can be uploaded on a regular basis. And I'm not going to get into a lot of discussion today about shadow databases and things of that nature where you will hold data until it becomes more effective. Obviously, a lot of the CRMs charge by the number of records you have. There's conversation. But the key here is it just can't sit. If you're going to get the data, use the data. And in that using comes number 4, is influencing and mandating appropriate use for gift officers, for reporting, for metrics, for the infrastructure team. We have to use this. If we don't use it, then it's wasted. And yes, there's going to be pushback from all kinds of people. But at the end of the day, we have to advocate for the fact we need this philanthropy. And this is a tool. It's not an answer, which I'll talk about in a moment. It is a tool that makes us more effective. And that gift officers are going to have to change the way they do it. Smaller portfolios, being told you need to focus on this person a little more. By the way, this is why I think it's not a reduction in prospect management or prospect research. It's an increase. The future prospect researcher manager database people aren't just going to be holding the database together. What they're going to be doing is being predictively saying, you need to be focusing on these people. We can wipe half of your portfolio out because they're not going to give. But you need to focus on these people. Now it's going to take leadership to influence and mandate that usage. And lastly, how to use it. It should be used for how to mitigate costs with the increasing mailing costs for annual giving. Are there 30, 40, 50% of you people you should just not mail anymore to because the predictive modeling says they're just not going to give to you? Well, they gave us a gift 5 years ago. We got to keep mailing to them. Why? How to use predictive modeling to save costs and increase efficiency. For major gifts, it's about pipeline. You got to go see this person over that person. It's also can be used for increased giving, i.e. the thought process of, hey, this person's giving us money, but maybe they should be giving us more if we actually had some conversation. Who should we be elevating in terms of Libunts and Sibunts? Last year, but unfortunately not this. Some year, but unfortunately not this. It can be used for, and I'm doing this with a client or two, campaign feasibility studies. Who do you want to interview? If you know that someone has the ability, just pure wealth, of giving you a lot of money, but they're only giving you $5,000, wouldn't you like to interview them to find out why? Well, predictive modeling AI can analyze that and give you 25, 50 names like this. Your longtime donors, yes, you might want to do an interview with, but you figure they're going to come along with you. How do you increase your capacity? That's what a campaign's about. A specific need to increase capacity. How do you do that? All of these tactical things are ways in which they should be used and some of the challenges with them. But my last thought is this. Again, this is not a replacement. I've heard someone recently say they believe that at some point artificial intelligence will be able to replace certain parts of a nonprofit. I'm not there yet. I think the relationship building process is still the most important piece. What we get out of faith and trust in that relationship is what's most important. Prospect management is going to look different. This is not a replacement. This is an improvement. And what we have to realize is that improvement, what's the mother of invention? Innovation. If you're not willing to think about this, not make changes today, but be accepting as they come, then you are going to get passed by as a leader, as a gift officer, as database professional and infrastructure expert. I don't care. Board member, CEO. This is where we're headed. Accepting it will be the important part. And AI is a part of nonprofits' future. Don't forget to check out the blogs at Philanthropy, 2 per week. Kind of put them on link down in as well. You get an RS feed. Just things I see, 90-second reads of different aspects of life. Some related to philanthropy, some not. Just things that I think about. If you're interested, make sure to email me at podcast@howlphilanthropy.com. Crazy world we live in. It's changing. I would think that my parents in the 1960s, as they started talking about going to the moon, thought much the same. The world constantly evolves. We have to evolve with it. But philanthropy has been consistent throughout history as a way to make a difference. Remember my favorite saying. Some people make things happen. Some people watch things happen. Then there are those who wondered what happened. Don't be someone who wonders what happened when it comes to how we evolve, because you are someone who makes things happen for the people and the places in your community that need it the most. I don't know a better way to spend a life, knowing that what we do, what you do, board member, major gift officer, infrastructure, it's part of the team, leader of the team, whatever. I don't know how you don't feel, and I hope you do, that what you do is worthwhile every day. You're doing great things. Nonprofit world needs you. Philanthropy needs you, because there are people in the world who need philanthropy. Look forward to seeing you the next time, right back here on the next edition of Around with Randall. Don't forget, make it a great day.